Okay, good morning, everyone. All right, so I've never taken a class with Dr. Larrick, so I don't know how he teaches, but I'll give you just a short spiel on kind of how things go with me up here. So I ask you guys lots of questions. Now, I know as a student, when a professor asks you a question, you feel like you're supposed to know the answer, right? That's not the way it works with me at all. I ask you questions to sort of keep you engaged, because I used to be a student too. I know what it's like to sit out there, have notes come up, you really get into the note-taking thing, and sometimes the brain shuts off, right? You get really into the note part. I don't want that in here. I'll try to go slow enough so that you can write the notes, but so that you can also think about things as well. So what I'll try to do is ask you questions. I want you, when I do that, to think in your mind, what do I know about what he's asking? Okay? I'd really like it if you guys would engage with me and tell me what you think. I don't expect you to know the answers to lots of the things I'm going to ask you about. I'm expecting wrong answers. You guys are taking this class to learn something, right? That's because you don't know everything. So I'm expecting wrong answers. When you give me a wrong answer, it shows me what your misconceptions are. It shows me where you are in your learning. And I can give you a response based on that hopefully will help you learn. So don't feel bad about throwing your hand up and giving a wrong answer. In fact, I'd love to reward people for like the wrongest answer possible. I've always wanted to do that. Throw you a cookie or something, you know. But at any rate, when I'm asking you questions, interact with me, okay? This is a great size class. I think we have 12 students in here. To me, that's always been the perfect size class. If you look back through history, the greatest philosophers of all time, they all seem to have like 12 students. It's big enough for a diversity of discussion, but small enough that your voice doesn't get lost. So this is great. So anyway, let's sort of start. We're going to talk about population today. And there's a couple reasons why we do this. In my classes, I tend to talk about population a lot, okay? Now, last class, Dr. Larrick gave you a definition for a natural hazard. This is a course on natural hazards, right? What's a natural hazard? Let's just start with the basics. Anybody remember what Dr. Larrick gave you as a definition? Yeah.
Is a natural hazard just any large weather, geological, just some big destructive event that can cause damage to things?
Okay, damage is in there. People are in there. Yes.
Hazard because it helps you going to like directly impact like infrastructure and like people. Like a hurricane in the middle of the ocean.
Okay, is a hurricane in the middle of the ocean a hazard? That's a great question, right? I guess it's a hazard if you got a boat bobbing around out there, right? But it becomes a hazard to us when? When it starts to affect, like he said, infrastructure, the possibility of life. So this, you guys have probably heard about the hurricane, right? It's barreling up through Louisiana. I think it's into Arkansas now. Is it affecting you? You're not feeling the effects of the weather, right? But over the next few months, you might be affected by some offshoots of it. Your insurance rates might go up. Things like that. So I actually took this definition from Dr. Larrick's slide last class. This is what he put up. Natural hazard, a natural process and event that is a potential threat to human life and property. Okay, so we're gonna, it's not working well. We're going to focus in on the human life and property thing, and that's why we're going to talk about population today. What do you guys know about human population? What's going on Earth right now with respect to human population? How many people live on planet Earth? I don't need the exact number. Ballpark is fine. Yeah?
11 billion?
What's that?
11 billion?
11 billion? 7 billion? I mean, nobody's out there like counting each individual, and there's error in this, right? But it's probably somewhere between 7 and 8 billion people. Okay? How many here in the United States? Anybody know how many we have here in the US? It's about, yeah, go ahead. About 350 million. What have you heard about population worldwide in terms of, is it getting bigger, smaller? going up, and it's going up fast. It's going up what we call exponentially. Now, you've probably heard, maybe taken classes, is expanding population a good thing or a bad thing? Depends. I like that answer. It depends. Mostly, I think what you hear are the negatives, right? As human populations go up, there's less food for everybody, less resources for everybody, more crowding. What about something like this pandemic? Does a huge human population make it better or worse? Makes it worse because there's more sites, people for that virus to spread. So some aspects of human population growth are definitely not good. Are there any good parts to human population growth? Yeah.
The economic benefits of having a lot of people focusing from a lot of different industries.
Say that again?
Economic benefits, more people, more money being spent.
Okay, she said that there's probably some benefits to economies. We have more people working. We have more people that can produce goods. I mean, think if you were 3 people, would you be able to extract material from a huge mine and make things? It gets really difficult. You need a big workforce sometimes to produce some of the goods that we like to have. Yeah? Technological developments. Where do technological developments come from? What's the origin of all science and technology ultimately? What do you think? People, your brains, right? Ideas. Okay, so a lot of times when you hear news reports about population, it's all negative, right? Oh, we're eating ourselves out of the world's going to be, fraught with too many people. But there's some good aspects as well, and that's something I want you to keep in mind as we go forward with this. Okay, let's take a look at what's going on worldwide with respect to population. Now we're going to take the evolutionary view of things. Humans sort of popped up in the fossil record maybe 2 million years ago, okay? That's when we see evidence of the earliest human beings. So we've been on this planet 2 million years. Pretty long time, right? Well, when did we hit 1 billion people on planet Earth? I have to do this manually today. We hit 2 million people in the year 1830. So humans popped up about 2 million years ago. We started procreating. Our population gradually grew until 1830. We hit 1 billion people on planet Earth. And then, wow, did we get busy. Bunch of rabbits, because it only took 100 years to hit the next billion. Took 2 million years to get the first billion people, and then we doubled it during the Industrial Revolution in about 100 years. That's actually pretty stunning. But it gets even more interesting than that. It took 2 million years to get our first billion people. It took 100 years to get our second billion people. It only took 30 years to get our next billion people. So we're looking at 1960. All right, I was born in 1962. So we had just about 3 billion people on the planet when I was born. Population's more than doubled since just my lifetime, 57 years. That's pretty amazing. Next billion only took 15 years, then 11 years. Then 9 years. What do you notice about the number of years to add 1 billion people? Keeps getting smaller and smaller, right? That's what's called exponential growth. Right now, we're sitting at 7.5 to 8 billion people on planet Earth. It's a lot of folks. A lot of folks that need resources, they need food, they need water. But that's just the basics to stay alive, right? We live in the United States, nice developed country, right? I don't think you guys realize how good you have it. Unless you've traveled a lot, you really probably can't understand how good you have it. If you want to charge up your cell phone or computer, what do? You stick a little thing in the wall, right? It's like magic, right? Electricity comes out of the wall, and it comes out of the wall all the time. How often do we go without power, honestly? Not very often. And man, if the power shuts off because of a storm for 20 minutes, everybody freaks out, right? Oh my God, I can't charge my phone. My refrigerator isn't running. You can go to places like Burma, Myanmar, Southeast Asia. They might have power on for an hour or two a day. And you don't know when. They don't know when their power is going to come on. They don't know when their power is going to shut off. If you guys want to drink water, do you guys worry about getting sick when you go drink water here in the US? Very rarely, right? Water, where's the water come from? Comes out of the wall, right? Turn on the little spigot and nice clean water comes out. You don't worry about getting sick. That's actually a rarity worldwide. Most people on planet Earth have problems finding clean water and enough food. But we don't think about it much here in the US, do we? So not only do we have 7.5 billion people, but a lot of those folks are living in places that aren't as developed as what we have here in the US. So they not only need resources to stay alive, but ultimately they want all the good stuff you guys have. They want clean water, abundant energy, access to the good things in life. They want a cell phone, they want a computer, they want to be able to go to school. So not only do these people require resources, as countries develop, they want more and more resources. Where do these resources come from? Where do you get the things that you need for your lives every day? Where do those materials come from? Think about the computer right here. There's a lot of stuff in that computer, right? Computers do not grow on trees. There's all sorts of materials that are required to make that computer. That stuff has to come out of the ground somewhere. So there's mines that are actively digging up resources so that you can have computers, cell phones, all the different things that we have here in this classroom. People want that stuff all over the world. So there's going to be a greater demand on people like me, earth scientists, to come up with resources for people as we have more people and as they want to live in a more developed society. Okay, is this exponential growth good? Bad? We talked a little about this. Why did population take off like it did in the 1830s? What do you think is going on? Why do we have so many people on planet Earth today, whereas just 300-400 years ago, we didn't have hardly any? What's going on worldwide that allows us to have so many people? Increase in life expectancy. Why? Why are we living longer? Healthcare is one. What else? Technology, right? There's several things that have allowed people to procreate at the rate we are. We are living longer because of better health care, medicine, dental care, things like that. Prenatal care is much better. Childbirth is a rough process, not only on the baby, but on the mother. Our survival rates for both are much greater than they used to be. We've learned a lot about childbirth, so we're better at it. Something like transportation. You might think, well, how could transportation lead to more people on planet Earth? But think about this hurricane that's hitting the US right now. We've known about this for better part of a week, right? How do we know about it? Well, we have these cool satellites that show us the weather patterns out in the ocean. When I was born, we didn't have that stuff. We didn't have those great satellites sitting up there. I was born right at the beginning of the space age. You know, and then we started putting weather satellites up in the 70s that allowed us to see what the weather was like out in the ocean, and we have better prediction. Now, if areas like Louisiana are terribly impacted by a storm event, we can get food, water, medical supplies in there really fast because of better transportation. There was a volcano that erupted in Indonesia back in 1815. Pretty big eruption. It killed over 90,000 people, but the volcano itself didn't kill all that many. Most of those folks died over the next 6 months from starvation and lack of water. That wouldn't happen today. We'd be able to ship in supplies, fly in supplies, so we have much better transportation to avert disasters. And just sort of science in general, what somebody mentioned a few minutes ago. We're able to grow more food on an acre of land. We genetically modify seeds so that they're resistant against drought or bugs or a different growing season. We have herbicides, pesticides. All these technological advances give us more food. We're able to clean up water that we've polluted. We have better science to understand disasters. We can make predictions as to where and when things like hurricanes are going to strike. So all this goes into helping us increase our population. And now we're up to between 7 and 8 billion people. All right, here's kind of a cool diagram. This shows where people live on planet Earth. Where do people live? You see lots of people live near coastlines, right? Look at South America. West Coast, populated. Interior of the Amazon, not so populated. East Coast, very populated. United States, West Coast populated, eastern half populated. But you see lots of folks living on coastlines, right? Why do so many people live on coastlines? Access to shipping, access to food. We can get a tremendous amount of food out of the ocean, right? Easy to get around, easy to find water. I mean, you can't drink salt water, but usually those are places where freshwater rivers enter the ocean as well. Okay? Where else do people live besides coastlines? Where do you see lots of folks? Well, there's a lot of people living right here. China and India. Look at India. You want to have lots of friends, go to India. You're going to bump into people in India. There's very few places you can go there and not find people. So extremely populated in this area. Europe's fairly populated as well. Okay? So we have areas where people are definitely living. Asia. Population of India is about 2.2 to 2.3 billion people. Population of China is almost exactly the same. There's some argument today as to which country has the greater population, but both are a little over 2 billion. Add that together, you're talking 4.5 billion people. Over half the people on the planet live in these two countries, India and China. Coastlines. And for this class, remember, we're talking about natural hazards. Think of how many natural hazards impact coastlines. Right? We have a hurricane today impacting a coastline. Where are most of the Earth's volcanoes found? Along coastlines, where two plates are coming together. Where are most of the earthquakes of the world found? Coastlines, where plates are coming together. Flooding. Lots of flooded areas, lots of deltas. Deltas occur along coastlines. So lots of the hazards we're going to talk about in class occur where we have the most people. Okay. Where don't people live? Does anybody live in Australia? Pretty sparsely populated. Few on the coastline, right? Where else don't you see people? Okay, the north, right? Alaska, Canada, Siberia. Climate's rough there, right? Too many months of the year where you can't grow food, can't live outside comfortably. Where else don't you see people? There's this rather conspicuous band across northern Africa, isn't there? What's there? Sahara Desert. In fact, a lot of the places that you see gaps in human population. Here, Sahara Desert. Isn't this interesting? Look at how many people are in eastern China. Look at how many people are in India. But then look at this. Why isn't anybody living? You would think if everybody's so crowded together, wouldn't they move into that area right there? What is that? Yeah, you have the Gobi Desert that's behind the Himalayan mountains. Yeah, it's a desert. Down here, two deserts. You got the Namib Desert and the Kalahari Desert. Deserts don't have enough water for people to survive. So the climate is a big influence on where people live and where people don't live. So you don't see many people in the north because of the cold climate. The outback of Australia, which is a desert. The Sahara, the Namib, the Kalahari. Now this isn't a desert here in South America. It's actually the Amazon rainforest. It's just very sparsely populated. The western U.S. is not terribly populated. Okay, so we know where people live. We see where people don't live. I have about a 3 or 4 minute video. It's kind of interesting. It's going to show you how population has grown over the last 2,000 years. So 2,000 years ago, how many people on planet Earth? I didn't give you an exact number, right? What do you know about population 2,000 years ago? It was less than what? Less than 1 billion, because we hit 1 billion people in 1830. Actually, about 2,000 years ago, worldwide, human population was about 300 million. So basically, the same population that's in the United States today was spread over the entire planet 2,000 years ago. Okay? So that's where our starting point is going to be. Let me see if I can make this work. And I don't know about the sound. I don't see any sound. Let's see. All right, we can do without sound. So what you're going to see here is a map of the world, and there's going to be little yellow dots, okay? Each of those dots are going to represent 1 million people. And the dot is going to be placed kind of in the center of where those people live. And then as you're going to see, we're going to start at 2,000 years ago, and we're going to start going through time. And you see the dots come up as the population grows. And in some instances, you're going to see dots go away as the population drops. Okay, so this is 2,000 years ago. Okay, you are going to see dots that represent 1 million people. So initially, we're going to have about 300 dots on this map for 300 million people. And it's going to grow over time. And then down in the lower, I think, left corner, you're going to see major history events. Okay, so let's start. Where are people living 2,000 years ago? See a lot in China, just like today, right? You see a lot in northern India, just like today. You see a fair number in Europe, just like today. So here's the Roman Empire. Where's Rome? Right over here. So the Roman Empire, do you see much going on with population in Europe at this time? No, so here's this Roman Empire, but it's really not affecting population a huge amount, is it? Okay, we're at about 400 years into this. Does the map look very different? What's going on in North America? We have 2 dots, right? Mostly along the West Coast, Native Americans that live there. There wasn't even enough numbers of Native Americans in the East to make 1 million people. Mayan Empire. Mayans are down here in Central America. You seeing much going on there? No, you have these great events, they're not affecting population. Spread of Islam. You have much going on in the Islamic world at this time. So here we are, we're almost halfway through this exercise. Has the map changed that much? Now, there's a few more dots in the areas where we had dots to begin with. We have more people in India. We have more people here. We have these big events coming up. It's not affecting population all that much. So here we are 1,000 years into it. Still a lot going on. Watch Europe. Here's the Crusades. Okay. Much going on in Europe. Still adding people, right? Mongol invasion. Look what happens to China during the Mongol invasion. What's happening? Yeah, the Mongols killed basically 30 million people in China during these years. So you're going to see 30 dots go away from human Black Death. See how it affected Europe. All right, 1400, we're going to have Columbus going across the ocean here pretty soon. Watch the U.S. Okay, there Columbus just landed. See much going on in North America? Nope. White settlers have been here 100 years. Do you see much difference? No. So here we are in the 1600s. Where's population growing? India and China, some in Europe too, right? Here we are, 1776, we just became a country, right? Do we have many people in the US? All right, here starts the Industrial Revolution. Each dot is 1 million people. Okay, I'm born right now. There we are today. And this is what we're going to be in 25 years. Pretty amazing, huh? When did all the change happen? Right at the end, right? What if this keeps going? What if we do this 200 more years? It's going to be a very different world, isn't it? Okay. So I just wanted to give you that sort of map perspective. Let's see what we can do here. Okay, you've probably heard that we have some issues with human population worldwide, right? There are some parts of the world where there are so many people that we're seeing problems for other human beings. Where have you heard? You guys have all heard about China, right? China has over 2 billion people. Have they done anything about their population growth?
They put in that you only have one child.
Yeah, for a lot of years they had a one-child-only rule, right? To try to curb their population growth. Seemed like a good idea at the time. But there's been a lot of problems that have come up because of that one-child rule. One of it is culturally. In especially parts of rural China, boys are prized more than girls. And when families would have their one child and it was a girl, they didn't want the girl. So they would take the girl to an orphanage and just drop the girl off. And so there's orphanages in China that are just stuffed with baby girls. It was really, really sad. Now, a couple years ago, China softened this one-child-only policy. And they're allowing families to apply to have more than one child. But what they're finding is that there's not a lot of takers. Chinese families have evolved. The culture has changed. A lot of the single kids in Chinese family like being the only kid. And they don't want more children. So they're actually having a hard time getting Chinese families to have more children now. And it's becoming a problem because you have so many people in China that are my age, okay, and they're going on and getting old and retiring soon. And then what about young people? Do they have a lot of young people? No, they have this whole generation now where they only had one children. There's not going to be enough workers in China pretty soon to support the aging population. So China is going to be dealing with some real problems from their meddling with population. It was a good idea, it's just not working out the way they intended. Yeah? Okay, she asked, why has there always been so many people in China and especially northern India? I'm going to show a couple of maps in a few minutes that I think will answer that question, okay? We'll come back to that. Okay, we also know that There's been problems with population in Africa. Africa only has about 10% of the world's population as a continent, but because of the Sahara, because of wars, because of political fighting, there's been an extreme lack of food and water. So when you hear about population-induced problems, China and Africa are the two places you hear a lot about. Now you got to compare that with the US, okay? So here we are, here's the United States. We only have about 4% of the world's population. And what's interesting is our population is not growing. It's not exponentially increasing. We've gone from 300 million to 350 million over the last 40 or 50 years or so, but it hasn't been because of more babies being born. Most of that growth has been because of immigration. Okay, we're not going to get into politics of immigration, but it's just the fact that we've had about 50 million people arrive over the last half decade. That's what's increased our population, not having more kids. Europe's population is holding steady. Australia's population is holding steady. So the US, most of Europe, Australia, our populations are not growing except for people moving. Whereas the rest of the world is still kicking out lots of kids. Okay, I want you to hold that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that in a minute and talk about maybe some of the reasons why our population isn't growing when the rest of the world is. I don't expect you to write this down. You can find this on the internet. But it just sort of goes through the 10 most populated countries. You've got China and India at the top, both over 1 billion people. So roughly 4 times as many people in India as the United States, with a much smaller landmass. China, about 4 times bigger than the US. Indonesia, down in the Southeast Pacific, about the same population as the US, but a really tiny landmass. I've been to Indonesia several times. My wife lived there for 4 years. If you like to bump into people, Indonesia is a great place. There's so many people there. There's people everywhere. You go out in the rural areas and there's people everywhere. There's a volcano in Indonesia, Merapi. It's been active for the last 40 years. It kills people all the time. 1 million people live on the cone of that active volcano. And they just live with the volcanic activity. And every once in a while, kills people. That's just what they have to contend with. And you can sort of look down the list here. So that's where most of the people on Earth reside, in those top 10 countries. All right, somebody asked a question about India. I was in India a few years ago. I don't know if this picture is showing up well, but that is Delhi. Delhi is one of the craziest places I've ever been. You walk through the streets of Old Delhi, and people don't have stable electricity. So what they do is they shimmy out on these electric wires, and they hook up their own wires to it. And then they use those wires to run electrical appliances in their house. They pirate electricity. And they do that by climbing out on these wires and hooking it up themselves. Roughly 25% of all the power that's created in India is basically pirated by people who are just desperate for a steady stream of electricity. And it's weird because you walk around, there's wires hanging everywhere, there's monkeys running across the top, they're peeing on people down below. People everywhere. It's just nuts. But kind of cool too. But look where so many people live. So you expect people to live along the coastlines, right? We talked about the ability to have trade and living along the coast, but look at up here in northern India. There's a band of really high population. Do you guys know what's going on there that's attracting so many people to that part of India? If you haven't been to India, you probably wouldn't know this, but that's where the Ganges River flows. This big river, providing fresh water. It's also a sacred river to many of the folks in India as well. So there's a religious tie to the river, and obviously an economic tie, a health aspect to it as well. So this is a major river system. Again, water plays a huge role in where people live. Coastlines, and then up here at the Ganges at the base of the Himalayan mountains. So the Ganges is fed by snowmelt mostly from the Himalayas. It's one of our tallest range of mountains in the world. So people live along this northern border because there's a great river flowing there. China. Here's a map of China's population. Red areas, really high population. Out in the west, you see it's basically uninhabited. Why do people live where they do in China? Well, I'm going to put up a map of rainfall over the top of this. So sort of imprint this image of where people live here. Okay, here's a map of rainfall for China. Crap. Oh, it won't let me go back. Anyway, the map of rainfall almost perfectly maps out the map of China's population. So people live where rainfall is greatest. Again, they're looking at water. But China has some problems. This is Beijing. This is downtown Beijing. And this is on a semi-normal day. Looks cloudy, right? That's pollution. I actually had a friend who lived in this building right here. He worked there. And he said there were days where he couldn't see this building across the street because the pollution was so bad. Most of the pollution is due to coal plants that sit just outside of town. And they need these coal plants to produce the electricity for the incredible population that they have in Beijing. So would you want to live in that? Chinese people don't want to live in that either, but their population has grown so fast that they haven't been able to keep up with their infrastructure. They're just struggling to get enough electricity for everybody, let alone trying to clean up the mess that comes with it. Nobody wants this. The Chinese government doesn't want this. The pollution in China results in thousands of deaths a year, lots of loss of income. They don't want the pollution, but they can't clean it up fast enough. They're actually putting in coal fire plants for electricity faster than they can clean up the pollution. So it's just a problem with population going quicker than what humans can keep up with. This is a satellite map of China. And you see this middle band of clouds, looks kind of gray. Again, that's all pollution. Where do most people in China live? They live on that eastern coast, right? Wind direction tends to blow from west to east. So they have all these coal plants on the outskirts of town, and then all the pollution from that blows over the Chinese coastline. But does it stay over the coastline? No, it just keeps blowing out to sea. And in fact, some of the pollution we get in cities like Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco, it's actually coming from China. It comes all the way across the ocean. So it becomes a worldwide problem after a while. When you have a lot of people, people use resources, right? People buy things. Once you're done buying stuff, once it's lived its lifespan, where does it go? When you're done using something, what do you do with it? You throw it in that can back there, right? You think about it again when you leave the room? How many of you think about your garbage after you throw it out? It's like, damn, I wonder where that garbage went. You guys don't do that, right? No, you're going to throw it in that trash, and you're going to come back tomorrow, and that trash can's going to be empty, right? Well, what if nobody ever picked up the trash? That's what's happening in lots of countries. You go to places like Vietnam, people would take their trash out to the street. It doesn't go anywhere because they don't have the infrastructure to carry away garbage. They don't have the systems like what we have here in the US where, hey, if I bring my garbage out to the street, somebody's going to go pick it up for me on Thursday. You know, I know they're going to be here on Thursday. They're always here on Thursday. That doesn't exist in lots of countries. So what if nobody ever picks up your garbage? What do you do? What do you do if nobody picks up your garbage? It's not easy, right? What some people will do is they'll try to burn it. You know, and do you want everybody on your street burning garbage all the time? No, that's not so great either. Where do most people live? Along coastlines, right? Along rivers. If you have garbage and there's a coastline and there's a river, what's the reality? Where is that garbage most likely going to go? Into the water, right? Especially if it's a river. You know what's awesome about a river? You take your garbage, you throw it in the river, and where does it go? It gets carried away, right? Well, obviously the people downstream think that sucks, but that's the reality, is that lots of garbage from increasing human population ends up in water. This is a photo from a river in China. I don't think I have the picture up, I'm not kidding, I saw a river in India that had so much garbage on it that dogs were walking across the garbage that was floating on the river. There was that much of it. It's stunning. Again, I don't think folks in the US realize just how good we have it with respect to the environment. Now, nobody in India or Vietnam, do you think they want this? Nobody wants this. But they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have a system in place that can take that garbage and safely dispose of it. We just take it for granted here. Never think about it. You throw stuff in the can and it just magically disappears. We got stuff coming out of the wall that helps us, like magic. We have stuff that gets taken away from us, it's like magic. This is the infrastructure, the behind the scenes things that goes on in a developed country that most of the world doesn't have the luxury of having. Would you drink that water? All right, this is kind of interesting. I took this picture in Burma. So this is a couple of women pumping water out of a well, okay? So the water's actually coming up from the ground. But this is a lake, and you don't see it real well, but this lake is just full of garbage, okay? It's full of garbage. So this well is like right on the shore. It goes down maybe 6-7 feet. Where's that water ultimately coming from that they're pumping out of that well? It's the lake water that's soaking into the soil, and then they just pump it back up. So essentially, even though it's coming out of a well, they're drinking this water right here. They're just not getting the chunks. But do you think that water's clean? Not at all. But that's the best they have. If that's the best water they have, that's what they're going to drink. This just breaks my heart to see this photo. This little kid, and I've seen it happen. They'll be out on a boat, they will move the garbage away, they'll stick their cup in, take a cupful of water and start drinking it. That would kill probably every one of us in this room. Our stomachs are just not adapted to it. It might not kill folks in this part of the world, but it makes a lot of folks sick. And some folks do die. So clean water is a real issue. And it's an issue because we have so many people polluting water sources. Okay, so we certainly have some areas on Earth where we have some population-induced problems. We have massive pollution. We don't have enough clean water. We don't have garbage disposal. What should we do about this increasing human population? Or should we just keep adding 1 billion people every 10 years? What do you think? It's not simple, right? Should we have birth control everywhere? Would help, right? Why don't we have birth control everywhere? mean, it seems like a simple thing, right? Let's have birth control. We won't have as many people. We won't have as many of these problems. But yet birth control is not something that is universally done. How come? There's a religious aspect to it. Here in the United States, even though our population is growing, we have religious ideas that keep people from going down that avenue. And that exists all over the world, right? So birth control is a great idea, but sometimes it runs up against cultural problems. I heard about this initiative. They airdropped a bunch of condoms into some rural area in one of the African countries, and then they went back a few months later to see, what's going on with the condoms. And the condoms were being used. The women were using them to carry water. So unless you're going to have some sort of education that goes with it or manually apply them, I don't know. It doesn't always work. So we have lots of well-intentioned ideas that never really result in any good. So here's some ideas that we have kicked around. Education, okay? You've seen India, right? You've seen the maps of India. There's a lot of people in India. Smaller landmass than China, just as many people. Actually, the population problems in India are probably worse than China, but you just don't hear as much about it. Do people in India have access to education? Yeah, they do. Even in the rural areas, they have a pretty good school system. They are educated. Do you think they know about population in India? They definitely do. Are they doing anything about it? Not a lot. One of the reasons is back in the 1960s, the government had a policy. India has a caste system where they have people on kind of the low end of the totem pole, people on the high end. The low end of the totem pole, these people were called the Dalits. And the government instituted a sterilization program among the Dalits for a while, trying to keep the low-end people from procreating. It was horrible, and it left a bad taste in India's culture as a whole. And now anytime there's any talk about birth control, people just say, we tried to sterilize the Dalits, for crying out loud. So it's kind of a non-starter for a lot of people in India because of history. So there are cultural aspects that make doing anything about population difficult in the places that maybe need it. We talked about birth control. I like this idea. Al Gore, everybody knows Al Gore, right? Former vice president, former presidential candidate from about 20 years ago, still around, talking about climate change. Al Gore has what he thinks is the solution to the world's population program. And lots of people agree with him. It's not really a political thing. Has anybody heard of Al Gore's idea for solving the world's population problem? Okay, it's sort of based on something I mentioned earlier. Is the population expanding naturally in the United States? Is it expanding naturally in Europe? Is it expanding naturally in Australia? No. So those three places, population isn't growing. But yet you go to India, go to parts of Africa, you go to China, population's still going through the roof. What is different about the US, Europe, Australia than it is about India, China, Africa?
I think that in developing countries, the birth rates are lower, so they have more kids.
The birth rates are lower. Why are the birth rates lower?
But there's a focus on careers that isn't in other countries necessarily. There's a focus on other opportunities besides just this younger children at a very young age.
Okay, so she said in these countries that don't have an expanding population, people are more career-minded. And when you're more career-minded, you put off childbirth, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, at least 5 women in class today. You guys are of childbearing age. I will ask you, you don't have to answer. Any of you guys have children? Okay, you're probably in your, late teens, early 20s, right? None of you have children. If I went to India and found 5 20-year-old women and asked them, do you have children? What's the answer going to be? If I go to China and ask 5 20-year-old women, do you have kids? They're going to have children. It has to do with women. And Al Gore's solution is really simple. It's the empowerment of women. Giving women opportunities to pursue education, career. That's what's going on in the US. I mean, you can see it right in here. That delays childbirth, and you tend to have fewer children going forward. You know, if you live in rural China and you start cranking out kids when you're 14 and you live on a farm, my grandparents grew up on a farm. My grandparents had 7 kids. They needed 7 kids because back in those days, you needed a workforce to work your farm. That's what still goes on in lots of rural areas around the world. Women end up creating the workforce for the family farm. They have 6, 7 kids sometimes. Here in the US, you guys at least have some options. It's certainly not equal, men and women in the developed world, but you guys do have some access that women in other countries don't have. And it affects the population dynamics, doesn't it? So Al Gore's solution is simple. It's like, let's not worry about birth control. Let's not worry about the one-child policy. Let's, for God's sakes, not sterilize anybody. But what we should do is give women more opportunities to pursue careers in education. And if we do that, the population is going to take care of itself, like it did here in the US. Might be some merit to that. It's not that simple, but that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. So if we did that worldwide, it would help. Is it easy to implement those policies worldwide? No, again, we're going to come up against religion and culture and history. So giving women a more equal footing is something that we should do, but it's something that's not easy to do in some parts of the world. And it's not happening in some parts of the world. Okay, so we've been talking pretty negatively about population so far, right? I showed you the garbage. I showed you the pollution. I didn't show you starvation. I don't want to show those pictures. You guys can find them. I showed you people drinking horrid water. But is population growth all bad? I asked you earlier in the class, are there any good things about population growth? And you guys were able to give me a few. And I'll ask you this, okay? When's a better time to be a human, just in terms of living a long, prosperous, healthy life? Would you rather be alive today, when there's 7.5 billion people, or would you rather be alive 2,000 years ago, when there's only 300 million people? What was the average lifespan 2,000 years ago? Anybody know? Approximately?
40.
Yeah, if you made it to 40, you were a grand old man or woman. I'd be dead. I'd be pushing flowers. I'd be fertilizer. There's no way at 57 I'd still be alive. Average longevity back 2,000 years ago, 30, 40 years old tops. Okay? That's not good, right? Living in substandard housing compared to today, not as many medical advances. So here we have all these extra people on the planet, but in terms of being humans, it's still a pretty good deal, right? Unless you're living in one of these really horrible areas. So there are some good aspects to population growth. So again, would you rather live now for longevity, prosperity, ease of life, or 2,000 years ago? I think most people argue it's probably a better world for humans today. And why is it a better world today? Kind of related to that, I want you to think about a concept called carrying capacity. Basically is, okay, we have 7.5 billion people on this planet. How many people can the Earth actually hold? What if the Earth can only hold 4 billion people? We have 7.5 billion, right? What's going to start happening? What happens if you exceed the carrying capacity? What happens if you exceed the amount of people that the Earth can support with food, water, and resources? If you have more people than there are resources, then there's less resources for everybody, right? But you still have, you have a few folks, the strong, the mighty, they're going to get theirs, right? You're always going to have some that are going to find out a way to get theirs. And then you have the people on the lower end, maybe the elderly, the sick. They're not going to get enough, are they? When you're not getting enough resources, what starts happening? If you don't have enough food, don't have enough water, what happens? You start getting sick, right? Do we have sickness around the world in places where we have too many people? Perhaps. Do we have starvation on the planet? We do. So we have places where we may be seeing the carrying capacity exceeded. Now, this whole idea, is population good or bad? This kind of played out a number of years ago. It was a situation called the boomsters versus the doomsters. And it really had to do with two scientists. So this was back in the 1980s. So this economics professor, Julian Simon, he's a boomster. He said, so back in the 80s, this is when population started becoming more evident in the news. People started talking about, China's got some real problems. India has some real problems. We might not have enough food for everybody, and we're starting to add 1 billion people a year. This is bad, okay? That was the talk back in the 1980s. We're going to breed ourselves out of existence as humans. That was kind of the prevailing wisdom. Well, this economics professor, Julian Simon, wrote this article that basically gave the middle finger to everybody that was saying that population was a bad thing. And he published it in Science. And if you know anything about science in general, if you publish in the journal Science or the journal Nature, you are a rock star of science. It's really hard to get your work published in these. And here this economics professor got this work published in Science that said, everything you've heard about population is just wrong. It's just flat out wrong. We should add a lot more people to planet Earth. Let's stop talking about one-child families. Let's add as many people as we can, because the more people we add, the better Earth gets for people. Kind of what I was talking about before, compare 2,000 years ago to now. He said, the world is good for humans right now. Yeah, there are some problem spots around the Earth, but, when we add more people, we add more ideas to solve problems. So as time goes on, we amass more knowledge, and the world gets to be a better place. This was completely at odds with everything that you were hearing in the news. And in fact, it really pissed off a lot of scientists. And one guy in particular that was really angry about this work was a guy named Paul Ehrlich. He was an economics or an ecology professor who had just written a book called The Population Bomb. And the book basically said by the year 2050, humans are going to be dying off in droves because we're going to be exceeding the carrying capacity. There's not going to be enough food, not going to be enough water. Pollution is going to be such a problem. Sickness is going to be everywhere. We're headed down a bad path. And he said, not only is this work wrong, it's completely irresponsible to publish something that says we should keep adding people to the Earth. So this was kind of played out in a public forum, and it was interesting at the time. Well, as it turns out, the economics professor was not dissuaded at all by Ehrlich's criticism. In fact, he sort of doubled down and he said, not only are my ideas right that we should be adding people to the planet, I can prove it. And I will bet you $1,000 that I'm right. Pretty bold, huh? I will bet $1,000 to anybody on Earth that I'm right, that adding people will make the world a better place for people. What do you think about that? Would you bet him? How do you think he's going to prove it? What's that? You could look back on history, but, you know, yeah, population is growing and we're doing better, right? But at some point, are we going to hit a population where we're not going to do better? That's what the ecology professor was saying. At some point, we're going to hit this plateau, and if we add people, we're just going to have problems. And we're getting there. I mean, we're adding 1 billion people every 10 years. We're going to get there soon. But this economics professor said, I can prove it. I'll bet you $1,000. And as it turns out, the ecology professor said, I'll take that bet. I will bet you $1,000. So this guy is an economics professor, right? Now this goes back to supply and demand. Okay, as we're adding people, right? People want resources, right? The idea is that the earth has a limited amount of resources. So if people are continually taking resources out of the ground, what's going to happen to the resources as time goes on and we keep adding people? What should happen to the amount? Should drop, right? You're going to use shit up, you know? We're going to use stuff up. Now, from an economic standpoint, what happens to price when stuff gets scarce and people want it? Price goes up, right? So what he said is, I will bet you $1,000 that in 10 years, the prices for materials that we make stuff out of, those prices are not going to go up, they're actually going to go down. If prices go down, what does that mean in terms of abundance? We have more. So over 10 years, he says, we're going to add 1 billion people, but by the end of that 10 years, we're going to have more resources than we have today. And prices are going to go down. Do you want to bet him? And he's an economics professor, so he says, you got to use wholesale prices, adjusted for inflation, because inflation is sort of a natural expansion of the economy, and prices just naturally go up. Doesn't have anything to do with supply and demand. You don't want retail prices because there's middlemen in there. And no, we're going to use wholesale prices, and in 10 years, we're going to look and see what happens to the price of resources. So what he said to the ecologist is, you pick 5 resources. Pick any 5 you want. I don't care. Pick 5 that you think are going to go up in price. If you think oil is going to go up, pick it. If you think gold is going to go up, pick it. If you think corn is going to go up in price, pick it. And then we're going to look in 10 years. If those prices go up, that means there's less of them. That means that population is bad, and I'm going to pay you $1,000. But if prices go down, that means that there's more of this stuff after 10 years, even though we added 1 billion people, and you're going to pay me $1,000. And he said, yeah, the college professor said, I'll take your bet. In 10 years, those prices are going to go up. We're going to have less of them. Who do you think won the bet? You know, if you bet an economics professor something about economics, you're stupid, okay? As it turns out, the prices for goods went down over the next 10 years. So the ecology professor jumped in and said, I'll take this bet. So who is correct? Well, I'm not going to get into details here, but again, basically he told the ecology professor, pick 5 resources, buy them for $200, and in 10 years we'll see what they're worth. If they're worth more than 1,000, means the price went up, you win. Price goes down, I win. So they saw what they were at 1975 prices. They compared them to 1985 prices. If the prices are higher, the doomster wins. If the prices are lower, the boomster wins. Well, you can go back through time and do this exercise, and what you'll find is that the boomsters always win. And what I found even more entertaining was that every single resource that the ecologists picked actually went down in price. Why did prices go down over 10 years when we added 1 billion people? What's that? He said more people to gather the resources. That's kind of right. Basically, over that 10 years, human population as a whole came up with ideas that allowed us to grow more food, dig more materials out of the ground cheaply. So from an economic standpoint, we actually ended up with more stuff after 10 years and the prices went down. That sort of flies in the face of everything that had been told to folks about, oh, you know, population is just a bad thing. So prices fell because, so this was back in the 70s and 80s. This is the age of computers. Computers started doing work that people used to do, and they could do it for cheaper. Okay? What did a computer look like back in the 1950s? You know, it was the size of this room, and it did like 1/100th of what your cell phone can do. You know, your cell phone is way more powerful than the desktop computer that I had when I was a graduate student back in the 1980s. Things keep getting smaller because we come up with better ideas, right? We can do things with less resources today because we have better ideas. So computers reduce labor costs. We replace things that are expensive to get out of the ground with things that are cheap. Plastics are really cheap to manufacture. Metals are really expensive. So when I was a kid, if I wanted to make a phone call, I went up to the wall and I grabbed the receiver and I dialed and I put the receiver up to my, and how did my phone call, how did my voice actually travel to people somewhere else? What was the medium that carried my communications? Back then it was copper wires. We had wires everywhere, telephone wires. That's what the communication used. And then in the 1980s we came up with this stuff called fiber optics. Way cheaper, way less. Now what do you use to make a phone call? You use your cell phone, right? Any wires sticking out of it? So we don't even need like stuff now, right? We can send our transmissions not through wires or fiber optics. We can send it through microwaves. So we use less stuff to do the same task today because we added people to the planet that gave us better ideas. Another example here, aluminum. It's cheaper to produce than tin and steel. Okay. So are you convinced? You think we should add 1 billion people every 10 years? You're saying, no, we shouldn't. Aren't you convinced by the boomster?
Well, the economic reports don't necessarily show the impacts of where we're collecting those resources from, or the other countries in which we're obtaining these resources from, and how it's impacting their lives.
That's a great point. Is economics the best way to measure whether human beings should be adding another 1 billion of us every year or not? Do you think during that time there's more pollution on Earth? There might be. Now we've come up with ideas for mitigating pollution during that time, but there's some areas where it just doesn't keep up, right? So maybe this isn't the best way to measure it. When asked about winning the bet, Julian Simon said, you know, both Jayhawks and humans eat chicken, but the more Jayhawks you have, the fewer chickens you have. But with humans, the more chickens you're going to have. Because we use science, technology, ideas to actually grow things at a rate that we extend them. To me, though, this is really arrogant thinking that no matter what problems we come up with, that we're just going to think our way out of it. Can you think of any problem that we might not be able to think our way out of quick enough to solve before it impacts us negatively? We got something going on right now. It's pandemic, right? Having a lot of people is bad during a pandemic, right? That's more sites for transmission. What if it spreads faster than we can think of a solution? Do we have a solution for COVID? No, we're wearing masks, we're doing stuff to hopefully not catch it, but we don't have a solution yet. And what if the death rate wasn't 0.1% like it is now? What if it was 50%? You know, in 2 years, we could get a pandemic that might have a death rate of 50%. What if we can't come up with a vaccination or a treatment fast enough before it just spreads like wildfire through these populated areas? And yet, do you really want to add another billion people during that time? To me, that's pretty arrogant thinking. The other thing I will mention is how this, let's bring it back to hazards and finish up. Oh, I think, let's see. So if we go back to our definition of natural hazard, it's a process that poses a potential threat to human life. Growing population adds more people, right? And where are people living? Coastlines. Where are lots of hazards? Coastlines. So the more people we have along coastlines, the more people are likely to be impacted by hazards as time goes on, right? So from a hazard standpoint, adding people isn't necessarily a good thing, right? And as countries develop, remember, not every country is as developed as the US. So not only are people living along coastlines, they're building stuff along coastlines, right? They're building more buildings. These buildings are more expensive. When a hurricane comes in and wipes out an area, every year it gets more and more expensive because our infrastructure is more advanced. So we have more people that can be impacted, and we have a greater economic base that can be impacted. Those are two bad things with population. Any good aspect that you can think of with respect to hazards as time goes on? Yeah.
Haven't we been able to predict stuff a lot better now?
Yeah, we predict stuff way better now. So as we add people, we also add ability to mitigate these things. We can see hurricanes coming from a week away. We can do mathematical models that say, I mean, we knew it was going to hit Louisiana a week ago. 10 years ago, we weren't even that good at it. So as time goes on, our science gets better. And I'll leave you with this. We have 7.5 billion people on the planet, right? Do you think everybody's idea matters? You know, the thing with the boomster, they said, if we add 1 billion people, we add all these ideas. What if you're a little girl growing up in rural India? You might be Einstein-level intelligence, right? But with the culture there, maybe you never get to go to college. Maybe you never get to work with your ideas. Does your idea matter if you don't have an avenue for it? So I would say rather than add 1 billion people, maybe we should be looking for avenues for the people who are already here to make their ideas come to fruition. And I hope that's what we see going forward. So I'll just sort of leave you guys with that. I think Dave will be teaching the next class, and then you guys will get me sometime next week or in 2 weeks for flooding. So I will see you then.